So this morning we're going to do a quick overview of a 1996 Miata, this particular example. So this is part of what's considered the NA8. So those are made from 1994 to 1997. It's the switch over from the NA6. So this is the 1.8 liter. A lot of similarities to the 1.6. Still has the pop-up headlights. The majority of the exterior styling is the same. This particular example is a M edition, so we're going to cover that real briefly at the start here. Basically, the M edition was a special edition, and they made a slightly different version of it for each year from 94 to 97. The M edition was basically a special edition, a limited edition as well. They made about 3,000 per year, between 3,000 and 3,500 depending on the model year. And the unique things about the M edition, first of all, are the wheels. And Mazda did this with a number of features on the M edition that they were unique for each model year. So each model year has a different unique set of wheels. Some of the earlier ones had BBS. This one's got the 5 spokes. Each one a little bit different, and as well, each year had a unique color option that was only available for that year. Then going to the interior, they all had the tan leather interior. Different model years had a little bit different versions of the logo. They pretty much all had them on the fender here. The earlier ones, I think 94 and 95, did not have the logo on the seat, but you can see it there. And there's the door sill. It's on there, as well as on the tachometer too. But again, there's little differences from year to year. Some of the early ones, I don't believe, had the logo on the tachometer. So there's a couple little discrepancies. Also, you can really easily get these door sills that say M edition. So you see a lot of cars that are not M editions that do have that door sill. Same with the floor mats. You can get those aftermarket. But the tan leather interior, the Nardi shift knob, were all part of that package. Full power everything, basically fully loaded. ABS was optional. They don't all have ABS. And they do have a Torsen diff. So very cool little sort of appearance package, plus, you know, some of the best features. Since we briefly covered that, we're going to go through and talk about what makes the NA8 unique. So I guess we'll start by looking at the interior. So the dash and console here and the tombstone are slightly different for the NA8 versus the NA6. At a quick glance, they basically look the same, but the NA8 has a little more rounded features to most of it. A couple things to note on this example: these are the Eclipse vents, which is a common mod. So normally these would have the same type of vents, the little round ones that are the same for NA6. And then same for this center console is an aftermarket one. So just to note that. But otherwise pretty similar overall to all the other NAs. So if we take a look under the hood, overall pretty similar to the NA6. Couple things, you know, if you just happen to look under the hood, the 1.8 and the 1.6 do look pretty similar. Easiest ways to spot the difference is the coil pack on the 1.8 is actually on the opposite side. On the 1.6, the coil pack is on this side. Then here you have your cam sensor, which is on the opposite side on the 1.6. So that's about the easiest way to tell if you're just looking at an engine, to tell if it's a 1.6 or 1.8. Overall in the engine bay, the other big difference right here, we have our mass airflow sensor versus the sort of large metallic mechanical airflow meter that you have on the 1.6. But layout pretty similar overall. Over here we got our brake booster, brake master cylinder, clutch master cylinder and reservoir there. Our diag port there, which is used for testing and diagnosis. I think we covered that in a little more detail in some of our other videos. And basically you can jumper different pins in there to force different features to come on. Very useful for testing and diagnosis, as well as setting your timing, which is again similar to the 1.6. Something you don't need to do for NBs, but for all the NAs, you can adjust the timing that way. So yeah, coming through, got our air box here, air filter underneath there, power steering reservoir here, got the motors there for the pop-up lights. Got our radiator here, and this is the fan for controlling the temperature of the engine, which will come on, in this case, via the ECU. The 1.6s have a separate sensor down here, which is not present on the 1.8s. The 1.8s actually use the ECU to control the fan. And then, of course, the other fan for the AC, similar to most Miatas. A couple relays here for controlling the fans. This model does have ABS, so you'll see this module here. So again, this was optional, even on the M Edition. The ABS is optional, as well as the Cruise there. So this is the actual vacuum operated cruise system. It's got a line here that comes across over to the intake manifold. Got our coolant overflow, evap canister. This is the solenoid for controlling the evap canister purge. This little guy over here, this is the boost sensor, which sounds really cool, but has nothing to do with boost or turbos or anything like that. It's actually just for monitoring the operation of the EGR, and which is right here. That's your EGR valve right there. And then there's a tube that goes around to the back. This is unique for the 1.8s. It is found on NBs as well. But then down here there's a metal tube which basically takes the exhaust gas around the back of the engine, and then that valve allows it into the intake manifold. So it's basically an emissions control device. For what it's worth, 96 and 97 versions of the NA8 have OBD2, and so they're monitoring that EGR much more closely. If it is not working or if it's deleted, it will set a check engine light. 94 and 95 are OBD1, much simpler diagnostic systems, and there's a lot less that they can detect, a lot fewer engine lights that they can set, and EGR is one that's missing. 94 and 95 also don't have a second oxygen sensor, which we'll look at when we get down on the underside. So it makes the NA8 kind of a complicated model year, because there's almost like an NA8-1 and an NA8-2 being OBD1 and OBD2. So 94 and 95 again are OBD1, much simpler computer system, much fewer onboard diagnostics, and in an older car that can be kind of a benefit. Less likely to set lights, especially if you live in a place that doesn't do emissions checks. It's kind of a benefit to not have to deal with some of that headache. However, when you are trying to do diagnostics, it doesn't have the ability to plug in a normal scan tool. The best you're going to get is the diagnostics that you can get from this box out of a 94 and a 95. So plus and minus there. Sometimes it's really nice to be able to plug in your scan tool and read some signals if you're trying to diagnose some things. So yeah, just again, 94 and 95 are OBD1, 96 and 97 are OBD2. It's kind of a subtle thing, but it means the ECUs are different, a lot of the wiring is different, sensors are different, really some pretty substantial electronic differences. Overall, as far as functionality of the car, really no difference at all. So just something to point out there. Your fuse box, similar to most Miatas, kind of gets in the way, the wiper motor there. But should have its labels on there. If not, if yours is missing, of course you can find that image on the internet if you're trying to find what's going on. Got your wiper motor there. This is your clutch line here. This rubber line sometimes starts to go bad. A lot of people will replace those with braided lines. That goes down to your slave cylinder. We'll look at that when we get down to the underside. And on your throttle body here, pretty standard for most Miatas. We have our idle controller down here. This tube is a critical piece of the intake. A lot of people, when they're trying to go to an aftermarket intake, have trouble finding a way to connect this tube. This is what the idle controller sort of breathes through. So it does have to come up through the intake because that air that's being brought in through the idle controller does need to pass through this circuit and get measured by the mass airflow meter there. Then on the other side here we've got, this is the throttle position sensor. You don't usually see too many issues with those, but it's easy to get to if it's something that you have to mess with. We got our, it's a little hard to see down there, but we've got our power steering and AC. All right, I think that covers pretty much everything under the engine bay, and then we're gonna move on down to the underside of the car. So coming down to the underside of the car, we want to take a look at some of the stuff on the underside of the engine bay here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove this under tray here so we can see what's going on. All right, we got that under tray out of the way. We can get a little better look at the underside of the engine bay here. First thing that you notice that's kind of unique is the coolant, or I'm sorry, the washer fluid bottle is over here, and it's kind of got a little hose that goes up to the top for the filler. That's kind of a unique thing for ABS cars because the ABS pump sits where the washer fluid bottle normally would be, so it gets relocated down into the bumper. You can see here the bottom side of our radiator. We've got our drain plug here. Power steering rack, no different than any other NAs. Now it is a unique rack for the NA. The NB is slightly different, but basically in the same area. Looks basically the same. So from the underside here, you can see the alternator. You can see it's not too big of a job if you have to replace that. Luckily, comes out pretty easily. The bottom side of the oil pan here. Got the AC compressor there, and then just above it is the power steering pump. A little hard to see from this angle, but it's up there. As we come over to the back side of the engine, you can see there's just a little bit of an oil leak going on here. So we're going to be replacing the valve cover gasket and a couple other things on this car. Hopefully take care of some of these oil leaks, which, yes, the valve cover gasket leak, I think I've probably mentioned it in other videos, but it will come right down the back side of the engine and actually get into the bell housing and start to come out the little weep hole which starts to really look like a rear main seal. But again, rear main seal is very uncommon to go bad in these cars. So if you see oil down there, always look for the highest point first. And oftentimes you'll find that it's actually coming from the valve cover or the CAS O-ring. So couple little things there. Down here, just like all the NAs and NBs, you got your slave cylinder, the little boot here. And those are very common failure point. They just tend to leak. Stuff will come out of the boot here. This one seems dry in there, which is good, but very common, very simple fix, inexpensive. If you're starting to lose feel in your clutch pedal, or if you can't shift into gears, a lot of times that's what's going on. So as we move down towards the back of the car, just like every Miata ever made, we got our power plant frame here, which supports the back end of the transmission. So you can see there's no motor mounts, or I should say transmission mounts, on the back of the transmission. It's all just done with that power plant frame. Got the catalytic converter here. And then in between all those is your drive shaft, heading back there to the differential. So this is one of the differences that we were talking about earlier with the OBD2 versus OBD1 versions of the NA8. So with the OBD2, you have an oxygen sensor right here, which is basically just there to monitor the function of the catalytic converter. You can see it sits just downstream of that. There's an oxygen sensor right up here, which this is the one that actually monitors the function of the engine. And then the second one just gets compared, and it should see a lot less activity here because the catalytic converter will be cleaning it up. And that's one of the main functions that was added for OBD2. So looking at the transmission here, looks like there's a little bit of a leak going on here at the rear output. Somewhat common, relatively easily replaced seal there. And you can also get a look here at the speedometer cable. So it just screws in to the side of the transmission there. When removing this, you'll see this kind of knurled section. It's really convenient. People want to grab that with pliers. It is possible to crush that, and then it won't really thread in properly. So the best way, this hex side here, this is a 22 millimeter, or you can use an adjustable wrench, and that works much better, less likely to cause damage. But yeah, similar to the 1.6s, it's a cable driven speedometer, which then actually gets encoded inside of the cluster, and then the data is sent to the ECU. So it's kind of a cool, unusual way of doing that. But that's again an NA specific. 1.6 and 1.8 are both run that way. NBs use a electronic sensor. So the other cool thing though is the transmissions are interchangeable between NAs and NBs. And you can see here, there's this little bolt that's what holds in the little gear that actually picks up the speed from the transmission. So if you were swapping in a 5-speed or even a 6-speed from an NB into your NA, totally easy to do. All you have to do is pull this bolt out, take that gear out, and remove the sensor from the NB transmission, the electronic sensor, and then this gear will bolt right in, and then your cable will hook up, and the car won't know the difference. So pretty cool that they set it up that way, that you can switch basically between an electronic or manual controlled speedometer. So yeah, back here we've got our differential bolted up to the PPF. Our drive shafts here. Again, all very standard. So our differential here, All 1.8s have interchangeable differentials, so between the NA8 and the NB1 and 2. The 1.6 does have a different differential. It uses different axle shafts, and the prop shaft is also different because the length is a little bit different on the nose of this differential here. So very common that people would put a 1.8 differential into their 1.6 Miata, and it just means you have to swap the half shafts here, the differential, of course, and the drive shaft up there as well. The PPFs are the same, but the housing is different enough that you kind of have to swap everything that connects into it. So again, that's only between a 1.6 and a 1.8. All 1.8s from 94 to 05 are all interchangeable that way. So we won't go into too much detail on the suspension since it's the same as really interchangeable with all NAs and NBs. We got our lower control arm here, got our eccentric bolts for adjusting toe and camber, which that's a funny question that I've seen come up, that some alignment shops and even dealerships don't realize or won't admit, because they don't want to deal with it, that camber is adjustable in the front and rear. I've seen dealerships tell customers it is not adjustable. It is, in fact, adjustable on every Miata ever made. So that's where it's done in the back there, and we'll show you in the front in just a minute. Really, the only thing that's a little bit unique is that because this is an ABS equipped vehicle, you can see right there the ABS sensor, a little wire going for it, and it picks up the signal off of that tone ring right here. So it picks up those pulses magnetically as it comes past the sensor. So if you do have a car that has ABS, if you do have to replace your drive shafts here, you do have to get ABS specific ones because that ring is actually part of the drive shaft. So if you install one that doesn't have that ring on it, it won't be able to read the speed and your ABS won't work properly. So then there'll be one on all four wheels. So it's four-wheel ABS. So then kind of the same thing up here. Got our upper and lower control arm. ABS sensor is built in to the knuckle there. Kind of see that there. And in this case, the tone ring is not really visible. You can just see the edge of it through there. But that's part of the hub in this case. So again, if you are getting your hubs or bearings replaced, you want to make sure that it's using an ABS hub. And then here's this is the caster adjustment, kind of at the rear of the control arm. So that will effectively move that lower ball joint forward and back as you move this in and out. So that's your caster adjustment, and then the camber adjustment here. All right, so I think that pretty much covers everything from the underside of the car here. Just while I'm looking, you can see here, this is where all the fuel lines and brake lines are run. And then you got your fuel filter here underneath this little cover. Can be kind of annoying to get these little plastic screws out, but that's where your fuel filter is located. Just like all NAs and NBs, pretty much in the same location. Since I'm looking here, this is the drain for the soft top. So it actually lets the water kind of come in through the rain rail, and then it'll drain out there. So it's important to keep those clean. That's part of, I think, the reason why a lot of Miatas have rot in this area, in the rockers, or sometimes you'll see a little bit of it coming through to the outside, is that even if your car hasn't seen any snow or salt, they can get water down on the inside there, and if it doesn't drain out, if the drains are clogged up, the water will get trapped in there and kind of rust it from the inside out. So just a couple couple little extra things there. Not really NA8 specific, but Miata specific. And again, just like all the Miatas, we've got 4-wheel disc brakes. And unfortunately, Mazda got sort of clever with the brakes, and the 1.6 or the NA6 and the NA8 brakes are a little bit different. Very similar overall, but they actually, especially in the rear, it is a different brake pad that's used compared to the 1.6. And then on the NBs, excuse me, on the NBs, you've got the sport brakes and the non-sport brakes, and so there's kind of an unfortunately large number of variations that you can have for brakes on Miatas, which makes it a little difficult for us keeping stuff in stock. So there's so many variations, and then of course we've got people who want track pads, versus nice and quiet and smooth street pads. So sort of infinite variations there. All right, well, now I'm done rambling about the brakes. I think that's gonna about wrap it up for this video. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer them, or maybe make a video if there's a topic that needs to be covered or explained further. All right, thank you.